Between 1937 and 1945, the Japanese Imperial Army operated a facility in occupied Manchuria where thousands of men, women, and children were subjected to experiments that make Joseph Mengele look restrained. They were infected with plague, cholera, and anthrax, then dissected alive to study the progression of the disease. Without anesthesia. While they were conscious. And when the war ended, the United States made a deal, full immunity for the scientists in exchange for the data. Every single person responsible walked free. This is the story of Unit 731, and it is one of the most suppressed atrocities of the 20th century. The man behind Unit 731 was Shiro Ishii. A military physician, a microbiologist, and by every reasonable definition, a war criminal who never faced justice. Ishii was brilliant in the way that people who lack any moral framework can sometimes be brilliant. He saw opportunity where others saw boundaries. In the early 1930s, Ishii traveled to Europe and observed the aftermath of World War I, specifically the impact of biological weapons. He returned to Japan convinced that biological warfare was the future, and more importantly, that Japan needed it. He argued to the military leadership that biological weapons were cheap, devastating, and because they were banned by the 1925 Geneva Protocol, which Japan had signed but never ratified, they represented a strategic advantage precisely because other nations had agreed not to develop them. By 1936, Ishii had what he wanted. A dedicated facility in Pingfang, Manchuria, far from Japanese soil, in occupied territory where the subjects would be people the empire considered expendable. The compound was massive, more than 150 buildings, an airfield, barracks, laboratories, and a prison designed to hold up to 600 people at a time. It was officially designated the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Guangdong Army. The locals were told it was a lumber mill. Inside those walls, what happened was not warfare. It was industrialized torture disguised as science. The prisoners, Chinese, Korean, Mongolian, and Russian civilians and POWs, were referred to internally as Maryuta. Logs. Lumber. That was the official term for human beings inside Unit 731. It connected to the lumber mill cover story, but it also served a psychological function. You do not feel guilt about processing lumber. I am going to describe what was done to these people, because I think historical amnesia is a form of complicity. But I want to be clear that what follows is documented in testimony from Unit 731 personnel, in the data recovered after the war, and in the accounts of the rare survivors. This is not speculation. Prisoners were deliberately infected with bubonic plague, cholera, typhoid, anthrax, syphilis, and other pathogens. They were then dissected while still alive to observe the disease's real-time effects on internal organs. Anesthesia was not used because the researchers believed it would compromise the data. Former members of the unit have testified that subjects were conscious and screaming during these procedures. Frostbite experiments. Prisoners were taken outside in the Manchurian winter, temperatures regularly reaching -20 to -30 Celsius, and their limbs were exposed until frozen solid. Researchers then tested various rewarming methods, including immersion in hot water of varying temperatures, to determine optimal treatment for frostbite in combat conditions. The limbs were often gangrenous. Some subjects had their frozen limbs struck with objects to see how brittle the tissue had become. Pressure experiments. Subjects were placed in pressure chambers and the air was increased or decreased until their ice popped from their sockets. Researchers documented the exact pressure differential at which organs failed. Weapons testing. Prisoners were tied to stakes and exposed to shrapnel bombs, flamethrowers, and biological weapon delivery systems at measured distances. The goal was to determine the effective kill radius of various weapons. Vivisection was performed on pregnant women, some of whom had been deliberately impregnated by Unit 731 staff through forced rape to study the transmission of diseases from mother to fetus. Children were not excluded from the experiments. Some were brought to the facility with their parents. And none of this was rogue behavior. This was institutional. Funded. Approved. Ishii reported directly to the emperor's military command structure. The data was carefully recorded, catalogued, and sent to Tokyo. Unit 731 was not a secret from the Japanese government. It was a project of the Japanese government. I know this is difficult to listen to, and I debated whether to cover this at all. But I believe that the victims of Unit 731 deserve to be remembered, and the deal that set their killers free deserves to be known. If you think these are the kinds of stories that need to be told, subscribe to Mind Trap. We do not look away from the hard ones. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and let us keep going. Because what happened after the war is almost as disturbing as what happened during it. As the Soviet army advanced into Manchuria in August 1945, Ishii ordered the complete destruction of the Pingfang facility. Buildings were demolished. Records were burned. The remaining prisoners, several hundred people, were killed, either by lethal injection, poison gas, or gunshot. The bodies were incinerated. The staff were ordered to take the secret to their graves, on pain of death. But secrets that big do not stay buried. When the Americans began debriefing Japanese military personnel after the surrender, the scope of the biological weapons program became apparent. And here is where the story takes a turn that should make every person who believes in justice deeply uncomfortable. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander of the Allied powers in Japan, struck a deal. The scientists of Unit 731, every single one who cooperated, would receive full immunity from prosecution. No war crimes trials. No prison. No public accountability. In exchange, they would hand over their research data to the United States. The reasoning was Cold War calculus. The Soviet Union was now the enemy, and the biological warfare data gathered by Unit 731 was, in the words of one American assessment, absolutely invaluable and could never be obtained in the United States because of scruples attached to human experimentation. That is an actual quote from a classified report. The Americans acknowledged that the data existed because of atrocities, and they decided the data was worth more than justice. The Soviet Union did prosecute some Unit 731 members in the Khabarovsk war crimes trials of 1949, but the United States dismissed those proceedings as communist propaganda. The American public was never told. The victims, overwhelmingly Chinese, received no acknowledgement, no apology, and no compensation. Shiro Ishii lived as a free man in Japan until 1959. He died of throat cancer at age 67. He was never charged with anything. Some of his subordinates went on to become leaders in Japan's post-war pharmaceutical industry, medical schools, and public health institutions. The governor of Tokyo from 1999 to 2012, the heads of major Japanese medical companies, senior university professors. The fingerprints of Unit 731 are woven into the fabric of modern Japanese institutional life. Japan has never fully acknowledged what Unit 731 did. Not officially. Not in its school textbooks. Not in any statement that carries the weight of a national reckoning. In 2002, a Japanese court acknowledged for the first time that Unit 731 existed and that biological weapons were used against Chinese civilians. But the court rejected compensation claims from the victims' families. The reasoning: the San Francisco Peace Treaty of 1951 had settled all wartime claims. In other words, the legal framework built to normalize post-war relations was used as a shield against accountability for crimes that were hidden from that very legal process. Chinese, Korean, and Mongolian families have spent decades seeking acknowledgement. Some of the victims' descendants are still alive. They have been denied repeatedly. Japan's standard position is that insufficient evidence exists, or that the matter was settled by treaty, or simply silence. Meanwhile, the data collected by Unit 731 was used by the United States. The frostbite research in particular was integrated into American military medicine. The biological weapons data informed the U.S. program at Fort Detrick, Maryland. We used it. We benefited from it. And we paid for it with immunity for the people who tortured and murdered thousands of civilians to generate it. An estimated 3,000 to 12,000 people died inside Unit 731's facilities. The true number may be higher. Many records were destroyed, and the biological weapons deployed in the field against Chinese cities may have killed hundreds of thousands more. Plague-infected fleas were dropped on Chinese population centers. Cholera was introduced into water supplies. The full death toll of Unit 731's work may never be known. Here is what I keep coming back to. We prosecuted Nazi doctors at Nuremberg. We hanged some of them. And we should have. But the architects of Unit 731 who did things that were, by any objective measure, as horrific or worse walked free because their data was useful to the winning side. The lesson embedded in that decision is brutal. Atrocities committed by our enemies are crimes, and atrocities committed by our strategic interests are classified. The victims of Unit 731 were not soldiers. They were farmers, shopkeepers, mothers, children. They were called logs by the people who vivisected them. And for 80 years, the world has largely looked the other way. I do not think that is acceptable. I think their names deserve to be spoken. I think the deal that freed their killers deserves to be examined in the light. And I think the ongoing silence from the Japanese government is a continuation of the dehumanization that called those people lumber in the first place. This one is not a mystery in the traditional sense. We know what happened. We know who did it. The question is why the world decided it was acceptable, and whether that calculation was worth it. Tell me what you think in the comments. Should the immunity deal be revisited? Should Japan be held accountable? I read every single comment. I will see you in the next one. Estimated runtime, 13 to 15 minutes at natural speaking pace. SEO title suggestion, Unit 731, The Horrifying Experiments Japan Wants You to Forget. Tags, Unit 731, Japanese War Crimes, Shiro Ishii, Biological Warfare, World War II, Mine Trap, History, Manchuria, War Crimes, Cover Up.